Do you know how much fuel pilots are required to carry? This is explained in the fuel policy. Although we are not going to consider a specific number or come to a specific value in this particular video, but this will give you an idea about what policy determines how much amount of fuel is required to be carried for a particular flight and for that particular airplane, because it varies depending on the fuel consumption. Let's say in Cessna 172 the fuel consumption is much lesser compared to Airbus 320 or it is Airbus 350. Okay, so every airplane has different fuel consumption, but how much amount of fuel is required to be carried for your flight is dependent on certain policy which is known as fuel policy. It's quite important to understand this as it has good amount of weightage and it is required to calculate payload as well. So let's dive into this topic. This fuel required to be carried for a given flight is broken down into 4 categories. One is taxi fuel, other is trip fuel, then reserve fuel and extra fuel. So first one, taxi fuel. Taxi fuel, as the name suggests, is the one which is required to taxi from the bay of where airplane is parked to the takeoff point. The taxi fuel not only includes the fuel required for taxi, but it also includes the fuel that is required by the APU. APU provides air conditioning on ground and provides electrical supply when the airplane is on ground and engines are not started yet. As well as taxi fuel will include fuel required for startup, as well as if there is any additional holding because of the congestion at the holding point due to heavy traffic for departure, then that will also be taxi fuel. This fuel could be approximately about 200 kgs in Airbus 320. Of course, depending on the airport, depending on the traffic at that particular airport, this amount will vary. It can even be 500 kg depending on the circumstances. So for your particular airplane, it needs to be calculated separately. Then fuel required for the trip, which is trip fuel. Trip is place of departure to place of destination. The fuel that is required for this trip is known as trip fuel. So this includes the fuel which is required for takeoff, then fuel which is required to join an airway. Let's say you depart from Mumbai for Delhi. Okay, now if you depart from runway 27 in Mumbai and you have to fly an airway Quebec 1 to Delhi, then from the departure runway to the point you join that airway, you will need to fly standard instrument departure or SID. The route which will join the runway all the way to the airway is known as standard instrument departure, and the fuel which is required to fly on this SID is also included in trip fuel, as well as the fuel which is required to climb to a certain altitude, which is cruising altitude, that is of course included in trip fuel. In between, if air traffic controller asks you to climb or descend because of the traffic requirement, yes, the fuel will be required. Okay, then from top of climb to top of descent, that is in the cruise phase of the flight, whatever the fuel is required, that will also be included in trip fuel. From top of descent till the time you join the approach for landing at Delhi, let's say you get clearance to land on runway 29er left, so you will be getting the star which will join the airway Quebec 1 all the way to the approach of the runway 29er left. So when you fly on that star, the fuel will be required by an airplane, so that will also be included in trip fuel. Then you execute the approach and land. So this entire flight will require fuel by the airplane, and that will be included in trip fuel. Of course, this trip fuel is dependent on what is the weight of the airplane, what is the temperature, etc. That will change the amount of trip fuel. Let's say if the airplane is heavy, fully loaded, the amount of trip fuel will be higher. If airplane is lighter, amount of trip fuel is lesser. Depends on the passenger load. The airplane could be heavier or lighter. Okay. Then reserve fuel. Reserve fuel is the one which is, of course, reserve. In car you have reserve. Okay. But when you are on road, that time you have petrol pump, okay, where you can stop. Here you have to plan a flight beforehand and know how much amount of reserve fuel would be required for this particular flight and carry that amount of fuel. This reserve fuel is categorized into 4 types. One is contingency fuel or route reserve fuel. Second is alternate fuel. Third one is final reserve fuel, and fourth one is additional fuel. Let's see the first one, contingency or route reserve fuel. Contingency fuel is required in case, let's say, if on that particular day your airplane consumes more fuel because of certain reason than what you had planned for, then of course at that point of time you cannot just land in the middle of the flight just because you're running out of fuel, and that is not a great planning as a pilot. So you should have little more amount of fuel that will be included in contingency fuel. If in case on that particular day, if you instead of planned wind, let's say you plan for tailwind of 10 knots, but in flight you have headwind of 10 knots, that means there is change in wind or which will increase the flight time, and that will increase the amount of fuel required for your flight. In this case you will need more fuel, so that will be included in contingency or route reserve fuel. If in case on that particular day, because there is more traffic on that particular route, like Mumbai-Delhi route is very busy. So if in case you don't get a certain flight level which you had filed for in the flight plan, and you get a lower flight level, when you fly at a lower flight level, then the amount of fuel consumption is more, because at lower level the density of air is more and engine will have to provide more fuel to combine with more denser air in order to get that amount of thrust. So there is fuel air mixture in the engine. So if more denser air is present, then more fuel is required. If less denser air is present, then less fuel is required. Okay, so it is economic to fly at higher altitude. But if on that day you don't get that flight level and it is occupied by some other airplane, then you will have to fly at lower level, which will consume more fuel. So that time you cannot tell ATC, no, I don't have fuel to fly at this level. So that is the reason why you need to carry contingency fuel or route reserve fuel. That's about contingency or route reserve. Next, alternate fuel. If you go at the destination and because there is bad weather, let's say there is thunderstorm activity present at Delhi that day, or if one of the runways is shut and there is a lot of traffic on that particular day and your sequence is way behind for landing and you do not have that much of extra fuel to wait and keep holding, then you don't keep waiting until you run out of fuel completely, and you plan beforehand, okay fine, if in case I don't get to land at so and so time, then I am diverting to the alternate airport. Okay, so in that case, let's say your planned alternate is Jaipur, then you can plan your diversion to Jaipur, go land there, refuel there, and then come back to Delhi. This is the way you need to carry alternate fuel from Delhi to Jaipur, okay, and that is at a planned flight level as per the forecast winds. Okay, this needs to be followed. So that is regarding the alternate fuel. Let's say you go to Jaipur because of certain one of the runway is shut and there is a lot of traffic. Because of that your sequence is way behind, you have there is bad weather and all those things, and you have diverted. Now when you come to Jaipur, you won't be the only airplane to divert. There might be some other 4-5 airplanes which might have diverted along with you. You might have to wait for a while before landing at Jaipur, but make sure that you do not land with very minimum amount of fuel. Okay, that is another dangerous situation. So if in case you might have to hold for a while, you will require certain amount of fuel which is known as final reserve fuel. That final reserve fuel for a jet engine is 30 minutes of fuel at holding level of 1500 feet above alternate airport. Okay, so that is the final reserve fuel. If in case it's a piston engine airplane, then this amount is 45 minutes at alternate airport. So that is final reserve fuel. What is this additional fuel? Additional fuel is required in case if there is no destination alternate available or no en route alternate available. If there is no destination alternate available, like let's say you are going to a place which is an island, there is no other airport around where you can divert, so in that case you have to carry additional or more reserve fuel for holding, and that is about 2 hours. That is the additional fuel which you will need to carry. All right. And other scenario where there is no en route alternate available, in that case, let's say you go from one place to other and in the middle there is absolutely no alternate. Let's say you fly over ocean, or you fly over poles, you fly over jungle, or you fly over desert, or over polar regions. In that case, if there is no other airport available from departure to destination, in that case, let's say you have a pressurization failure, you have to descend to a lower flight level which is 10,000 feet. Okay, and of course the amount of fuel consumption will be more in that case. Because of that, you will need to carry more fuel, and that is why you need to carry additional fuel. Okay, so these are the 4 categories of reserve fuel. Now we have covered taxi fuel, trip fuel, reserve fuel. The 4th one is extra fuel. So first of all, trip fuel itself is calculated considering what is the forecast weather at destination, what is the forecast weather at alternate, what is the weather at departure, what is the expected traffic at departure, destination, alternate. Accordingly, the trip fuel is calculated. If there is any bad weather or if there is expected traffic congestion, then extra fuel is required to be calculated and is carried by the pilot. All right. So these are the categories and breakdown of fuel. I hope you have followed this. If you have any queries or doubts, feel free to comment down below. Thank you.